Hello there, do you like going absolutely berserk on your enemies, slashing them until there is nothing left so you can harvest their friendly primo gems to pull for more characters in Genshin Impact? Well then, Cyno is the character for you, but even though he is a very selfish DPS, he likes to do a ton of damage himself. He does need some good teammates to really function well, and with the right team, this very selfish berserker DPS can deal a ton of damage. So let's go to my personal top 5 Cyno teams in Genshin Impact. We will of course have some 5-star character teams and some free-to-play variants in there. So I hope you enjoy. So for the first team we have the strongest team for Cyno that I think you can make. It is Cyno, Nahida, Yelan and Bennett. Now Cyno is a very selfish character and he enjoys to be on the screen the majority of the time that you are fighting. So he generally benefits a lot from characters that deal a lot of off-field damage like Nahida and Yelan. And this combo gives you the amazing Hyperbloom reaction. It is very simple in its use. Nahida procs the enemies with Dendro and they are constantly applied with Dendro, as her E skill infects them for a long time. Yelan does a ton of off-field damage and also keeps the enemies under the effect of Hydro for a very long time. And then Cyno finishes the reaction constantly proccing Yelan's water attacks and doing Hyperbloom reactions on those seeds. This team is incredibly good for single target damage and mowing down bosses or smaller groups of enemies. It kind of is meh against very large groups of enemies, but it does a ginormous amount of damage to major enemies or bosses. Next to that, because Cyno scales so well of Elemental Mastery, these reactions are going to be even more advantageous, as both the Electro Hydro reaction and the Electro Dendro Hydro reaction is very strong. So you can freely build some good Elemental Mastery on your Cyno, and with this signature weapon he's going to absolutely demolish anything. Now the second best team would be the free-to-play variant of this. You can swap out Yelan and Nahida with Xinqiu and the Dendro Traveler, and it comes around to the same concept. You use the reactions and Cyno's Elemental Mastery to deal a very large amount of damage, and Xinqiu and the Dendro Traveler work the best when they have very little screen time. Xinqiu applies Hydro just as well as Yelan, usually on a bit of a lower amount of damage, and the Dendro Traveler applies Dendro as good as he can. And then you need a healer or a supporter, and in this case we take Bennett because Bennett is just not balanced. Next we have a bit more of an unorthodox team with Cyno, Zhengling, Yelan and Bennett. Now this team is good for a couple of reasons. First of all, Zhengling does incredible off-field damage even when you are not consistently proccing the Vaporize reaction. Of course, with someone like Tartaglia, constantly vaporizing gives Zhengling more benefit, but by just taking up one team slot she is already incredibly good. Next to that you pair her with Bennett and you get the fire damage bonus, enabling your Cyno to hit even harder as well. Then you put Yelan here or a Xinqiu, and you get the water appliance more often than you can proc it with Electro. So you are both proccing the Hydro-Electro reaction and the Hydro-Pyro reaction, sometimes vaporizing with Zhengling's Elemental Burst and just dealing a ridiculously high amount of damage. This team is generally a little bit better against more dense packs of enemies or a larger amount of enemies, as Zhengling's burst deals with them quite well. This pack really is just about, we take the hardest hitting off-field damage characters, pair them with Cyno, and Cyno can definitely benefit off of this, as he is on the screen so much that a character like Zhengling can still shine, as he just needs so little screen time. So it's a good combo just for the raw damage, but the reactions that you can do aren't optimal, but still very strong. Don't underestimate the just raw power that you can get from having a build Zhengling in this scenario. She is incredible and does a great support for Cyno, especially together with Yelan and Bennett. Now the fourth team is for when the opponent hits incredibly hard. I'm talking Cyno and Nahida as a organic one-on-one combo together, as Nahida and Cyno is just incredibly good, and then Albedo and Zhongli. And now why does this team work so well? Cyno and Nahida combine really well. You build Elemental Mastery on your Cyno, and with the Electro Dendro combination you can deal even more electro damage, and your Cyno, especially your E when it is ready to proc, hits incredibly hard, and that is really good already. And then Zhongli and Albedo provide two things for you. The first thing is great off-field damage with the structures that they put down, and the second thing is of course that Albedo gives you Elemental Mastery whenever he casts his ultimate. And Cyno scales incredibly well of Elemental Mastery, and so does Nahida. So by using Albedo you can buff your Cyno, kind of like a attack buffer like a Bennett, but in the elemental mastery, making the Dendro Electro reaction even stronger. Next to that, Zhongli of course has a shield, so against a boss type of enemy, this team is actually quite nice if your Cyno is really stacked, because the boss will not be able to take you down very easily, and the off-field damage from Albedo, Zhongli and Nahida is going to make you hit incredibly hard without requiring too much setup or special things. You are also not as burst dependent on this team. You really need your elemental burst on Cyno of course, but the rest of the team works really well even without their bursts. So they're quite flexible to build. And now for the final team, we're playing Hypercarry Cyno. Now Hypercarry Cyno is played with Cyno, Nahida, Kujosara and Bennett. Now this team is all about just having fun and hitting as hard as you can with your Cyno. By proccing with Dendro, Cyno deals an incredibly boosted amount of damage. And with Kujosara, especially at Constellation 6, you will be dealing a increased amount of critical damage if you are a Electro user, which Cyno is. And Cyno can hit even harder, so with Kujosara buff, Bennett's attack buff and Nahida's elemental appliance of Dendro, your Cyno can start trotting at the mouth and start hitting the enemies incredibly hard. This team is all about, if you have an incredibly good Cyno, this is how you give him the absolute hypercarry role. But it is less optimal than something like Yelan, as you're not proccing that many elemental reactions. But I think Kujosara is not a terrible slot here, and it is actually quite fun to have your Cyno hit incredibly high numbers. Next to that, Kujosara can also hit quite hard herself. So make sure to do Bennett burst first, then with Nahida, then Kujosara, and then Cyno. So, I hope one of these teams gave you inspiration to build a very strong and competent Cyno team, and I wish you the most pleasant rest of your day.